Hey there, I'm Allison Thayer, a researcher at the Light and Health Research Center. In this video, we will go over using the Circadian Stimulus, or CS, calculator. In this video, we'll discuss why you should use the CS calculator, how to use it, including adding different sources and completing calculations, as well as some documentation to learn more. So, why use the CS calculator? In the video, Designing with CS, it was talked about that spectrum, along with light level, was used in circadian stimulus CS calculations. And it's important to note that it's spectrum and not just CCT, or correlated color temperature, and specifically the spectral power distribution, or SPD, that is used in these calculations. You can see in this graph an example of this. So in typical designs, CCT is used to tell you how warm or cool a space will appear. But for your circadian system, there's actually a big difference between how your system responds to cooler light sources, such as 65K, where you can see here that it's lower illuminance at the eye to reach your daytime target of 0.3 CS. And that's what's graphed here. And if you compare it to warmer sources, such as 3000 or 2700 Kelvin, it takes a lot more light at the eye to reach your daytime target. And specifically, CCT does not exactly tell you how your circadian system will respond to that light. For example, this 3000 classification, all these sources that fell within there had a range of about 250 lux at the eye to reach it, all the way up to almost 500 lux, or 2 times as much light to be reaching your CS target of 0.3. So it's really important to, when you're doing your designs, to be putting in your own SPD that will be used in your designs. So let's get started. First, type in cscalc.light-health.org into your web browser. So this is the freely available open source CS calculator. When you get to the page, you'll notice the Sources tab, as well as the Calculations tab. We'll start with the sources. In the source list, you'll see a list of preloaded sources, such as CIE standards, such as daylight, blackbody radiators, and all the way at the bottom you'll find narrowband monochromatic sources, such as blue and red. To add a source, click on it, and you'll get more information about it, including a description, as well as a graph of the SPD. To add the source, hit the Add Source button. This will show up in your selected sources list. As we mentioned earlier, it's important to have your own SPD for each of your designs so that you get an accurate representation of what your source will achieve. So to add your custom source, go to the plus button, and a menu will pop up where you add more information. You want to have a descriptive source name so that you can recognize it later when you go back to it. You also want to input an SPD. So what I did was take spectral measurements of a luminaire that's already installed in a space. We took measurements at 12 different desks to see the difference between each of those desks and the source. You can see on this graph that desk 1 through 12 are very similar in terms of their relative spectral power. So since the relative SPDs are very similar, you can use the average SPD in your design. So for the CS calculator, you'll want the wavelength, as well as the associated relative spectral power for each of the wavelengths. In this example, the wavelengths are in 1 nanometer increments. To copy your wavelengths, a neat trick is to hold Control-Shift-Down, and that will let you select all the wavelengths pretty quickly. Going back to the CS calculator, you can toggle between adding both the wavelength as well as the spectral power together, or you can do them separately. So for this, we'll want them separate, and I pasted the wavelengths into the first column. Go back to Excel, scroll to the top, and grab your relative spectral power. Again, holding Control-Shift-Down. Copy this column, and go back to your source. Add that to the values column. So once you have those two in there, you are able to add your source. And you will see it show up in your selected sources list. You can also delete or remove a source at any time, and it will still stay in your source list. And something to note as well, we don't save any of your SPD data. So if you refresh the page or close it, your SPD information will be lost. So something to do is you can download all the custom sources that you put into the calculator. Do that by selecting this download button. It will show up in your downloads folder, and you can rename it to something you can remember later. You can save that to your own files and use it later. So once you have your source in here, we can go to the Calculations tab. What's nice about having a single SPD is that you can input the CS target you want to meet, and it will give you the target luminance value that you will want to target for your designs. In this, you'll see a couple things. You'll see an SPD graph, the chromaticity, color rendering, and scrolling, you'll see different information, such as CS, CLA, the melanopic EDI, as well as CIE alpha optic radiances. So when doing a design, you'll need to put in your luminance values of what you've either calculated in the field or on photometric software. So let's go through an example of that. So we'll go back to my Excel file where I have measurements that I took. I took horizontal luminance measurements at each of the desks, as well as vertical, about 4 feet above the floor. And we have the illuminance values that we got at each of those desks. So to figure out what CS we have at each of these desks, I'm going to split screen and go back and forth to calculate the CS for each of the desks. So now that I have all the values at the desks, I can see that not all of them reach that 0.3 target. I also have the average, which is about 0.25 for this space. If you recall the Designing with CS video, it was mentioned that you can add the saturated blue light to the space to boost your CS levels. So let's give that a try. Let's go back and add another source. We'll add the blue LED and see what that does to our CS. So the average light level in the space was 255, giving us a 0.256 CS, not quite our 0.3. But let's say we add just 10 lux of blue, and that actually changes our CS to 0.338. You can see the combined SPD, and it's worth noting as well that CS is not additive. Your illuminance, 255 plus 10, gives you 265 lux, but that CS is not actually additive. So it's important to have that combined SPD. One more feature of the calculator is you can download the relative or absolute combined SPD that you calculated. Lastly, there's more information about the CS model and metric that you can get to by clicking here. This will bring you to our documentation page, where there's notes on the new CS model, as well as other information on the background, inner workings such as the CS model itself, and different metrics, and technical information as well. So you can learn more by going to this site, docs.lighthealth.org/cscalc. So that is an overview of using the CS calculator. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.